Welcome to chapters 36 through 49 of Turning Pro, a book club in the Full Stack Business Builder community that you can find at go.fsbb.io. Now, today in this book club, we're going to be going over all the things that an amateur is. So lots of short chapters here, but we want to go through all of this so we can take stock of it and see where we need to go pro and stop being an amateur. Let's jump in. So before we get into this, two things that I want us to remember that we've covered so far from Stephen Pressfield. The two core things that, there's more than this, but the two core things that I think are so important for us to remember is as amateurs, we are constantly struggling with this idea of resistance. Resistance is the thing that causes us to not take action on that which we know we should be doing. Okay, so number one, we are constantly fighting resistance. And number two, we're constantly fighting ourselves, right? The resistance could be from the outward. It can be inward too, but fighting ourselves I have moments, guys, where I'm watching a YouTube video, like Asmongold or something like this. And then while I'm watching it, I literally think to myself, it's time to work. It's time to work. It's time to get back to work. Enough of the nonsense. And then I just do it, right? And so we're learning here as amateurs to overcome daily resistance and to overcome ourselves. So let's take that into stock as we go over this. The amateur is an egotist. The amateur identifies with his own ego. He believes he is himself. That's why he's terrified. The amateur is a narcissist. He views the world hierarchically. He continuously rates himself in relation to others, becoming self-inflated if his fortunes rise and desperately anxious if his stars should fall. The amateur sees himself as a hero, not of his own movie, but of all the movies of others. He insists in his mind, if nowhere else, that others share his view. The amateur competes with others and believes that he cannot rise unless a competitor falls. If he had the power, the amateur would eat the world, even knowing that to do so would mean his own extinction. I'll tell you, if you ever meet someone who is a narcissist, they're an amateur. The amateur lives by the opinions of others. Though the amateur's identity is seated in his own ego, that ego is so weak that it cannot define itself based on its own self-evaluation. The amateur allows his worth and identity to be defined by others. The amateur craves third-party validation. The amateur is tyrannized by his imagined conception of what is expected of him. He is imprisoned by what he believes he ought to think, how he ought to look, what he ought to do, and who he ought to be. I'll tell you, I've met many a man and many a woman who I truly believe are living out the desires of their dysfunctional relationships with their parents. It's time to grow up, friends. It's time to become your own human. The amateur permits fear to stop him from acting. Paradoxically, the amateur's self-inflation prevents him from acting. He takes himself and the consequences of his actions so seriously that he paralyzes himself. The amateur fears, above all else, becoming and being seen as judged as himself. Becoming himself means being different from others and thus possibly violating the expectations of the tribe. Without whole acceptance and approval, he believes, he cannot survive. By these means, the amateur remains inauthentic. He remains someone other than who he really is. Man, I'll tell you, whenever you meet someone who is living to the tune of a tribe or a group, they're an amateur, right? I have never, and this is maybe my own ego here, but I've never been part of a tribe or a group. I've never said, I'm into this and this is all I am and this is my people and this is my community. No, I'm part of so many communities. I'm Sigma like that. I think that's the word, right? I'm Sigma like that, right? And so, don't be an amateur. Strike your own road. The amateur is easily distracted. The amateur has a long list of fears. Near the top are two: solitude and silence. The amateur fears solitude and silence because she needs to avoid at all costs the voice inside her head that would point her toward her calling and her destiny. So she seeks distraction. The amateur prizes shallowness and shuns depth. The culture of Twitter and Facebook is paradise for the amateur. He's not wrong. I'll tell you, someone who is not willing to go deep, become a subject matter expert in that craft, will always be an amateur. The amateur seeks instant gratification. There's a popular bumper sticker a few years ago: too much ain't enough. Too much ain't enough, and too soon is too late. The amateur, the addict, and the obsessive all want what they want now. The corollary is that, when they get it, it doesn't actually work. The restlessness doesn't abate, the pain doesn't go away, the fear comes back as soon as the buzz wears off. This is not a Burger King world, my friends. You cannot have it your way. Not all the time, at least. The amateur is jealous. Because the amateur is so powerfully identified with herself, she finds it extremely difficult to view the world through the eyes of others. The amateur is often unkind or insensitive to others, but she saves her most exquisite cruelty for herself. The amateur fears eclipses her compassion for others and for herself. Man, there's this person in my wife's life who is such a sad sack. This lady is always self-deprecating all the time. Like, she's always dogging on herself. Like, the lack of positive reinforcement from her own mouth is why she is in a world of despair all the time. And I find it fascinating that my wife even spends time with her. But sometimes network individuals, I guess, are sometimes useful, I suppose. The amateur lacks compassion for himself. In his heart, the amateur knows he's hiding. He knows he was meant for better things. He knows he has turned away from his higher nature. If the amateur had empathy for himself, he could look in the mirror and not hate what he sees. Achieving this compassion is the first powerful step towards moving from being an amateur to being a pro. Man, we gotta love ourselves, guys. We do. We really do. We really have to love ourselves. The amateur seeks permission. The amateur believes that before she can act, she must receive permission from some omnipotent other, a lover or a spouse, a parent, a boss, a figure, or an authority. An amateur sits on a stool, like Lana Turner at Schwab's, waiting to be discovered. No, the amateur seeks permission. The pro just executes. This is something that I talk about with my team all the time. Just do. Then I can give you feedback. The more time we spend on planning is useless. Nothing is outcoming from planning. There's no output there, right? I need delivery. Go do it. Then we'll talk about it. The amateur lives for the future. The amateur and the addict focus exclusively on the product and the payoff. Their concern isn't what's in it for them and how soon and how cheaply they can get it. Consumer culture is designed to exploit the amateur. If you don't believe me, watch 10 minutes of TV or scroll through any magazine or online shopping site. My beef with the American culture is that almost every aspect, including the deliberations of the legislature and the judiciary, have been debased to pander to the culture of amateurism. The promise that our products and politicians proffer is the promise one might make to an infant or to an addict. Quote, I will get you what you will want. I will get you what you want, and it will cost you nothing. Sure. The amateur lives in the past. This one I absolutely despise. Anyway, because the amateur owns nothing of spirit in the present, she either looks forward to a hopeful future or backward to an idyllic past. But the past evoked by the amateur is make-believe. It never existed. It's a highlight reel that she edited together from events that almost took place or should have occurred. In a way, the amateur's reimagined past is worse when it's true, because then it really is gone. The payoff of living in the past or the future is you never have to do your work in the present. Man, I can't stand people who live in the past. Like, I've been, and I'm deeply biased here, because I've been blessed with a biological nuance where I have long-term memory loss and short-term memory loss. Now, this isn't a debilitating thing, and you could overblow what I just said there, but true story, I have long-term and short-term memory loss. Like, I don't remember a whole lot, which actually is quite a blessing because it allows me to focus on today and building for day. That's it. And so, because of this disposition that I have, where I don't remember a whole lot that goes on in the past because it doesn't exist, number one, and number two, it doesn't really matter. Who I am is an amalgam of all of that anyway, so it is what it is. But what I despise, and I use this word specifically, are people who truly live in the past. Like, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. And all you do when you think about the past is you bring up emotions, often negative emotions, right? For people who like to live in the past, right? And they conjure up these stories. Why do you need to get emotional now in the present? Because of something in the past. Never think about the past. Only focus on now. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. You can let me know in the comments if you disagree with me on this. I think the past is of almost zero import. Like, truly. They say people, learn from the past. Sure. I hope I learned. I hope I never do that stupid thing again. And when I'm brought into that moment, I hope that I have such self-awareness that I'll say, I've been here before. I've done this before. And frankly, when I did it last time, when I chose that, it was a bad outcome. I probably shouldn't do that again. But for me to conjure that up now in an inconsequential moment, to bring up those emotions now, and the emotionality now is of no value. Don't bring up the past. Doesn't freaking matter. The amateur will be ready for tomorrow. Two Hollywood producers were talking. I've got a good news, said one. And I've got bad news. Give me the good news. Remember the mansion we were trying to rent for the big party scene, but we couldn't get it because it cost $50,000 for the one night? Well, I just talked to the guy, and he'll give it to us for $10K. What's the bad news? He wants $100 up front. The sure sign of an amateur is he has a million plans, and they all start tomorrow. Yeah, I know a couple people like that. They're pretty frustrating because they talk a big game, they like to plan, and they like to use flowery language and make sure that everybody's aligned and everybody feels good, but they never actually deliver anything. In some of those instances, I would actually prefer the extreme opposite. Tell no one until you're done. Don't even tell me. Just do it. The amateur gives his power away to others. Have you ever followed a guru or a mentor? I have. I've given my power away to lovers and spouses. I've sat by the phone. I've waited for permission. I've turned in work and waited, trembling the judgment of others. I've given away my power subtly, with a glance that was perceptible to no one, and I've given away overtly and shamelessly for all the world to see. Exile, failure, and banishment can be good things sometimes because they force us to act from our own center and not from someone else's. I applaud your story of how you hit rock bottom, because at the bottom, there's no one there but yourself. Ain't that the truth, though? Isn't that the truth? In many cases, the only thing that is required for you to actually get up off your ass and do something is you have to hit rock bottom in absolute despair. And if you hit rock bottom, I hope that you look up and you see God. The amateur is asleep. The force that can save the amateur is awareness, particularly self-awareness. But the amateur understands, however dimly, that if she truly achieved this knowledge, she would be compelled to act upon it. To act upon this self-awareness would mean defining herself, i.e., differentiating herself from the tribe, and thus making herself vulnerable to rejection, expulsion, and all the other fears that self-definition elicits. Fear of self-definition is what keeps an amateur an amateur, and what keeps an addict an addict. That's right. We have to wake up to the realities of our failings. We have to wake up to the realities of our faults. We have to wake up to the realities of the things that we're terrible at, that we're no good at, that we failed at, that we're not a good person about, that we have... Yeah, and that's okay. Keep going. Chin up. No worries. That's part of life. But be awake. Don't be asleep. Be self-aware. Realize who you are, what you're capable of. And frankly, if I can just say right now, everyone listening to this, you are capable of far more than you ever imagined. I promise you. I am living testimony that things can be done out of the sludge and the worthless. Finally, the tribe doesn't give a shit about you. The amateur dreads becoming who she really is because she fears that this new person will be judged by others as different. The tribe will declare us as weird or queer or crazy. The tribe will reject us. Here's the truth. The tribe doesn't give a shit. There is no tribe. That gang or posse that we imagine is sustaining us by the bonds we share is in fact a conglomeration of individuals who are just as fucked up as we are and just as terrified. Each individual is so caught up in his own bullshit that he doesn't even have 2 seconds to worry about yours or mine, or to reject or to diminish us because of it. When we truly understand that the tribe doesn't give a damn, we're free. There is no tribe, and there never was. Our lives are entirely up to us. Man. Some great words here from the wise Stephen Pressfield. We went over all of the versions of an amateur, an egotist, right? An egotist lives by the opinions of others, permits fear to stop him from acting, is easily distracted, seeks instant gratification, is jealous, lacks compassion for himself, seeks permission, lives for the future, lives in the past, will be ready tomorrow, gives his power away to others, is asleep, and finally, the tribe that you so espouse, that you care about, and that you think cares about you, at the end of the day, the tribe doesn't give a shit about you. It's just you versus you at the end of the day, is how I like to say it. So, 3 questions. Number 1, review all of the chapters we've covered today. What are the ones that you've struggled with the most? Let us know. I'm curious. Where have you struggled? Where have you been more amateurish? There's no fear here. Frankly, it's the internet. For you to post it on here is... Remember what the last chapter was? None of us really care. There is no tribe. The tribe doesn't give a shit. Now, we care because I want you to be better, and I'm hoping you're using and leveraging this content to be better, right? And I do care, but at the meta level, let's be intellectually honest. Nobody cares. It's you versus you. So, number 2. How will you begin changing your mind and changing your habits to fight the resistance that has plagued you before? And finally, number 3, which I think is the most salient, how can we help you? We're here in this community, the Full Stack Business Builder community and conference, right? We're here to help you guys. We're here giving away this great content. Let us know. I'll see you in go.fsbb.io.